spare. Harry now starts to talk about the other woman, by whom he is referring, of course, to Camilla. But in this, he starts off by just referring to her as the other woman, capital O, capital W, and how him and William harbour suspicions about this person, and they felt guilty about having not done anything sooner in relation to it. He explains that with his mum missing, note again he doesn't make reference to her being dead, which does indeed show the impact that her demise had upon him, almost his inability to accept it. He explains that basically it gave his father a free pass to see more of Camilla. And he explains that his father wanted to be above board about it, and therefore he wanted William and Harry to meet Camilla. Apparently, William went first, and he bumped into Camilla at the palace, but then he was formally summoned from Eton for a private meeting at Highgrove. And William didn't give any details, but basically seemed to give the impression that Camilla had made an effort with him, which he appreciated. Then it was Harry's turn, and his recollection of it is obviously in the depths of time, and he says basically both of him and her were calm or possibly bored. He didn't regard her, obviously, as... He didn't really care much about what she had to say because she wasn't his mother, and he wasn't her biggest hurdle. And he can't recall really what they talked about. Possibly they might have talked about horses. And he says that he did wonder if she'd be mean to him because, of course, of the stereotype of a wicked stepmother. But he says that she wasn't, and he was grateful for that. So after having met Camilla, his father asked him, what do you think about it? And him and William formed the view that their father should be happy, and they felt that he had played she played a role in Diana's disappearance, so there's a bit of a grudge there, but that they kind of understood that she'd been trapped in events also, and therefore if she could make their father happy, then they would go along with it, which seems quite a mature attitude for both of the boys, having lost their father, lost their mother, and they could quite readily have put all of the blame on Camilla. Then he explains about how his father never really spoke about his feelings. Now, part of that is that invariably, in many instances, he doesn't have any as a consequence of his narcissism, so there's nothing to talk about. And the type of narcissist that Charles is, he's not one that goes in for lots of pity plays and talking about how he feels. It's more about that sort of stiff upper lip, the distance that he has, the rejection of intimacy, because there is no emotional empathy that's there. He can exhibit cognitive empathy, but he's not one that's prone to doling out a lot of it. And Harry then recalls about how his father talks about his being bullied at Gordonstoun and that he didn't really survive, and makes reference to how his teddy got him through it. And it's a teddy that Charles still owns. And William and Harry felt that their father deserved a proper companion, not just the teddy, and basically said, look, we support you having a relationship with Camilla, but don't marry her. And Charles didn't respond to that, but Harry explains that Camilla did by playing a long game with a campaign aimed at marriage and eventually the crown. He then explains that stories started to appear about the conversations that took place and that hadn't come from William. And therefore the clear insinuation from Harry is that this information is being leaked by Camilla. So it's quite interesting actually in this section, because he shows, at least from this recollection, that both he and William were prepared to give her a chance, and that they wanted her to make their father happy. which is indicative of the emotional empathy that both Harry and William have. They want to see their father happy. William, of course, has emotional empathy for his father as normal, as he's within his circle of emotional empathy. The people that are normal have emotional empathy, deep emotional empathy, but they have it for a closer circle of people. Parents, children, siblings, some friends, some colleagues, maybe neighbours, but not more widely in the way that an empath does. But both of them have this emotional empathy for their father, and they want him to be happy. And so they say, we don't have a problem with Camilla, but don't marry her. And I think the rationale behind not marrying her was because it would be a great big, they viewed it as something that would be attracting fanfare and coverage and would rake over old wounds. So I think their stance actually in this regard is quite well adjusted, fair and mature, to say, we want you to be happy, Dad, so fair enough, you've introduced us to her, then you guys be together. However, we don't want the wedding. Of course, Charles didn't say anything. The suggestion that he ought not to marry Camilla is a threat to his control, which he then rejects with silence, in effect giving his sons a silent treatment. And thereafter, Camilla, of course, also a narcissist, she deems it a threat to control that the boys have suggested they ought not to get married. Now, of course, she doesn't sidle up to them and get Harry in a headlock and say, now listen to me, you little ginger bastard, you're going to do what I want, otherwise I'm going to borrow William's cheese grater and rub it on your head, right? So support me marrying your dad or else. And she doesn't sidle up to William and get him in a headlock and say, listen, you might have lovely blonde locks now, but I've looked into my crystal ball and I know you're going to be a baldy. So unless you want me to speed up the process and start slapping your head, you had better support me marrying your dad. That would, of course, be the direct assertion of control, a malign hoover over both of them, allied with threat. She didn't do that. Instead, there was an indirect assertion of control by triangulation with the press, by trying to get them on side with regard to the idea of becoming married, basically thinking there's no point trying to persuade the sons, they're against me in that regard. I will try and cultivate public opinion to, if not necessarily support it, at least be less objectionable to the concept of me marrying Charles. So an interesting glimpse at the dynamic there, whereby the emotional empathy of William and Harry is exhibited towards their father and to an extent also towards Camilla, but then the response of two narcissists to the boys not endorsing marriage. One, to assert control by staying in, but essentially in withdrawal with the silent treatment, and the other triangulating and doing so indirectly by trying to curry favour and opinion through the press. We now move on to the change of environment for Harry in his schooling. Join me in the next video.